The applause still rang in my ears when I saw them. Rows of soldiers in pressed uniforms had saluted. Neighbors had stood shoulder to shoulder, waving little flags, and I had just been pinned with a silver star that changed everything. Brigadier General Alexandra Monroe, U.S. Army. 20 years of service etched into a single ceremony. And then there they were. My family, the same people who had told me year after year there was no space at the lake house, no room for me at the reunion table. They stood at the edge of the crowd, hands raised in awkward waves, wide smiles pasted across their faces like cheap decals. My sister Carrie's pearls gleamed. My brother Dylan clapped too loudly. My mother's voice floated through the din. Alex, sweetheart, we're so proud. They pushed forward, ready to wrap me in hugs, ready to lay claim to me now that the cameras were flashing. But I'd already decided how this would go. I shook hands with my sergeants, first pressed my palm to Delgado's shoulder, bowed my head with Chaplain Carter. Only then did I turn to the people who had spent 20 years trimming me out of family photos. And I said the words that made their faces drain white as bleached linen. But that's not where this story begins. The message had dropped into my inbox like a depth charge. Subject line, Annual Monroe. Family, Lake Reunion, save the date. I stared at the cheery blue banner, Trinity, no Carrie. Always Carrie had chosen for the mass email. Clip art of a canoe, a row of smiley suns. The words, family is forever, curling across the top. I scrolled through the list of recipients, cousins, uncles, their spouses, even neighbors who'd married into the circle. My name wasn't bolded, not singled out. It might as well have been addressed to everyone but me. I knew the rhythm of this dance. For 5 years straight, the invitation meant the same thing my parents wanted me to know the event was happening. But within hours came the follow-up call, the gentle explanation about why there just wasn't space for me again. The cursor blinked, the words blurred. I rubbed my eyes, but all I saw was the same message it had carried since I was 12. You don't belong here. Major Monroe. I jolted, slamming the laptop shut. Remington leaned over my cubicle wall, his eyebrows knit in concern. His tie was crooked, as always, his coffee mug chipped. He'd served 3 deployments with me before leaving the Army for civilian contract work, but he still had that battlefield radar for trouble. You're not going to let it get to you again this year, are you? Of course not, I lied. My smile felt like it had been stapled to my face. Just another day at the office. Remington studied me a moment longer, then nodded. Sure, just another day. But it wasn't. The Monroe family lake house had been the backdrop of my entire childhood July cookouts, Christmases, with stockings hung crookedly on the stone fireplace. 4th of July sparklers across the dock. Every meaningful memory before everything shifted, before I became the outsider. I remember the summer I turned 12. Dad let Dylan join the men's circle on the deck to talk about business, though he was barely old enough to tie his sneakers. Mom sent me inside. Darling, why don't you help in the kitchen with your aunties? Carrie got to sit beside Dad, nodding sagely, like she was already inheriting his world. Nelson. No, Dylan was sent across the yard to show neighbors his new project, and I was left peeling potatoes, book balanced on my knees, told for the 100th time I was too serious for my own good. The memory tasted of onion skin and resentment. My phone buzzed. Savannah's name lit the screen, my childhood friend, the only one who'd sat with me on those kitchen counters. Let me guess. Her text read another reunion email. Bingo, I typed back. Want to bet how long before Mom calls to say there's limited space this year? The answer came sooner than I expected. The caller ID Mom, right on schedule. I let it buzz twice before picking up. Alexandra, dear. She cooed, her voice dipped in artificial sweetness. Let me save you the trouble. Mom, I cut in, surprised by the steadiness of my tone. The house is too full. Right, Carrie's kids need space, or Dylan's new girlfriend. Silence, long enough for me to hear the office air vent rattle. Well, you know how it is, she said at last, brittle and thin. Trinity's children are at such an important age. We want them to have memories of the lake. I stared at the envelope sitting at the corner of my desk. The one stamped promotion packet confidential. The one that, if approved, would make me the youngest female brigadier general in the army at 40 years old. "Yeah, Mom," I said softly. "I know exactly how it is." When I hung up, the weight in my chest didn't feel like grief. It felt like coals banked under ash waiting. I stood and walked down the hall to Lance's office. My mentor of 10 years looked up from his computer, caught my expression in a blink. "Family?" he asked, gesturing toward the chair across from him. I nodded, sinking into the leather seat. He leaned back, folded his hands. "Sometimes you wonder why you still let it affect you. But it does. Because you're human." I huffed a bitter laugh. "Best revenge is success, right?" Lance shook his head slowly, eyes glinting. "No, the best revenge is becoming so successful they can't ignore you anymore." I thought of the beach house, the exclusion, the childhood scars dressed as traditions. And then I thought of the sealed envelope, my career, the next chapter. Savannah's text chimed again. "You need a plan, not revenge. Justice. On your terms." I touched the envelope with my fingertips. The paper was cool, firm, alive with promise. Maybe Savannah was right. Maybe it was time for a plan. You'd think after 2 decades in uniform, after Ruck marches through the Hindu Kush convoy duty in Anbar, after writing condolence letters with hands that shook long after the ink dried, I'd be immune to childhood slights. But the truth is, those wounds never scab over. They just change shape, reappearing in the most ordinary moments, like an email with cheery clip art, or the memory of a summer that split everything wide open. I was 12, gawky knees perpetually bruised from climbing the sycamore by the driveway. That July, the air hummed with cicadas, the lake shimmered with green algae, and the smell of charcoal floated across the yard. Dad had his circle of men on the deck, neighbors, a few uncles, Dylan with his cowlick smoothed flat, and a soda in his fist, like it was a beer. Carrie sat in Mom's wicker chair, crossing her legs, just so nodding like she already knew the language of mortgages and market shares. Me! I was inside, hands deep in a bowl of potato peels. Mom's voice trilled from the kitchen doorway. "Darling, why don't you help your aunt slice tomatoes? You're so handy in the kitchen." I remember pressing my forehead to the screen door, watching Dylan lean into the laughter of grown men, Carrie basking in the attention. The screen mesh left diamond marks on my skin. That was the summer I learned exactly where I stood. It didn't get better with age. High school graduation. My gown itched, tassel slipping into my eyes. I searched the bleachers for familiar faces. My parents weren't there. They'd left early to beat traffic, or so they said later. There's a photograph someone took of me on stage diploma in hand smile too tight. If you zoom out, the rows of families behind me are filled with clapping hands and proud tears. The Monroe section, empty. ROTC acceptance letter too. I held it up at dinner, the eagle watermark gleaming. Dad grunted. "That's nice, but you'll outgrow this phase." Mom pursed her lips. Carrie launched into plans for law school. Dylan teased that I'd be the girl who carries a rifle instead of a briefcase. I excused myself, sat on the porch swing, and read the letter again under the porch light, committing the words to memory. If nobody else was going to celebrate me, I'd celebrate myself. The years blurred into duty stations, Fort Hood, Kandahar, Wiesbaden. I carried the family silence with me like contraband in a rucksack. The worst was deployment year 3. We'd lost a convoy in Helmand, and I hadn't slept for 36 hours. Mail call arrived. Soldiers tore open packages, cookies, letters, little trinkets of home. One box slid across the dust to my boots. I opened it. Inside was a paperback romance novel and a bag of off-brand candy. The address label read, "To Allie, stay out of trouble, kiddo. Love, Mom and Dad." Allie, as though I was still 12 potato peels sticking to my hands. I ate the candy anyway. Hunger has a way of dulling pride. Present day. I sat on the porch of my rented farmhouse just outside Fort Belvoir. The boards creaked under the rocker I'd scavenged from a thrift store. Cicadas still hummed, though now they mixed with the distant roar of commuter jets heading into Reagan. I replayed Mom's voicemail on speaker, her carefully modulated voice. Alexandra, honey, we'd love to have you at the lake, but you understand, with Carrie's children and Dylan's girlfriend, it's just too crowded this year. Too crowded. Always too crowded. Ma'am. I glanced up. Sergeant First Class Rosa Delgado stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a duffel slung over her shoulder. Her uniform looked like it had been pressed with an iron block. Delgado had been my shadow through 2 deployments, my ballast when nights stretched too long. You didn't answer the knock. You good? Yeah, I said, sliding the phone aside. Family call. Delgado stepped onto the porch boots, thunking against the wood. Family's complicated. Rucksacks aren't. She dropped the duffel with a thud. Pack smart. Carry what matters, dump the rest. I smiled despite myself. You're full of wisdom. Full of blisters, more like. She pulled out a pack of gum, offered me a stick. So, you gonna keep letting them rent space in your head for free? The cicadas buzzed louder, as if they wanted to hear my answer. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me still hopes they'll see me. Not the uniform. Me. Delgado chewed thoughtfully. They've had 20 years to see you. Maybe it's time you stop waiting. Her words landed like a stone in still water. Ripples I couldn't ignore. Later that night, I opened the envelope again. The promotion packet lay crisp under my desk lamp. Ink, sharp paper, smelling faintly of toner. Recommendation. Promotion to Brigadier General. I traced the raised seal with my finger. In the margins of my mind, I could still hear Lance's voice. The best revenge is becoming so successful they can't ignore you anymore. I leaned back, eyes closed. The kitchen potato peels the empty bleachers, the romance novel in a dust-blown package, all of it stacked against this moment. For the first time, I wondered if exclusion wasn't a wound anymore. Maybe it was fuel. The lake reunion email glowed faintly on my laptop screen across the room, unread, unanswered. I let it sit there, a ticking clock daring me to respond. When I finally did, it wasn't with words. It was with resolve. The Pentagon hallways have their own sound. A low hum of fluorescent lights, the distant echo of heels against marble, the faint murmur of classified conversations cut short as you pass. After 20 years, I knew the cadence by heart, the rhythm of bureaucracy. That morning, though, every detail felt magnified. The smell of floor wax, the flutter of paper, the metallic taste of nerves in my mouth. I clutched the folder stamped confidential as if it were both a lifeline and a live wire. General Officer Promotion Board Room 3B. The brass letters gleamed on the door. I straightened my uniform, smoothed an invisible wrinkle, and stepped inside. 3 officers sat behind a long oak table, their uniforms a mosaic of ribbons and badges. A flag stood at each corner, silent sentries. Colonel Monroe. The chair began peering over his glasses. You've served 20 years, 3 deployments, 2 combat commendations, command at battalion and brigade levels. Why now? Why should this star be yours? The question wasn't hostile, it was a test. I folded my hands behind my back, grounding myself in the stance drilled into me as a cadet. Sir, it isn't about why it should be mine, I said. It's about why it's necessary. Soldiers need leaders who've carried the ruck, walked the ground, written the letters home. I've done all 3. I know the cost of command, and I don't wear it lightly. A pen clicked. Silence. Then another board member leaned forward. You've faced attrition in your units. Losses. What did you learn? I swallowed once. Faces flickered in memory, Martinez with his crooked grin. Specialist Harper, who drew cartoons in the margins of his notebook. I learned that courage is communal, I said. That grief doesn't stop the mission, but it changes how you carry it. And I learned that soldiers will follow if they trust you've stood where they stand. Another pause. Pen scratched notes. A clock ticked. Finally, the chair nodded. Thank you, Colonel. That will be all. When I left the room, the corridor felt wider, brighter, as though the walls had shifted in approval. I didn't call my family. I didn't picture their faces. Instead, I found myself steering toward the base chapel. The chapel was quiet pews, gleaming with the polish of 1,000 hands. Sunlight slanted through stained glass, scattering blues and reds across the floor. I sat in the third pew, uniform cap, resting in my lap. Chaplain Carter emerged from a side office, his clerical collar neat against his fatigues. He smiled, settling beside me. "Heard you had a big morning," he said gently. "Word travels fast. In this building, faster than light." He folded his hands. "You nervous?" I considered. Not exactly. More like weight, as if every stripe, every loss, every decision is pressing down. "That's not pride," he said. "That's responsibility. Humility isn't hiding, General. It's accuracy about who you are." "General!" The word tasted foreign. Feels like a coat that doesn't fit yet. "It will," he said simply. The chapel bells tolled the hour. I breathed in the faint scent of candle wax, of wood polish, of peace. My phone buzzed as I left. A message from Carrie, my sister, plastered with emojis. "Lake's looking gorgeous this year. Can't wait for everyone to be together. Hope you're well." Not "see you soon"? Not "we saved you a room"? Just the assumption I'd read, nod and fade, back into silence. Another buzz, this time from Mason Hale, my old mentor. Hypothetical. If a certain officer were to pin a star, how public should the ceremony be? I smirked, thumb flying. Quiet. Purpose over pageantry. Seconds later, his reply. "Soldiers need to see it. Community does too. Don't rob them of pride they've earned right alongside you." And then Delgado chimed in, her timing uncanny. "Ma'am, if this happens, we'll need a formation. Don't argue. The troops deserve it." I leaned against a stone pillar, phone warm in my palm. Maybe they were right. Maybe hiding wasn't humility, it was surrender. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the farmhouse quiet, except for the hum of cicadas outside. I spread the promotion packet across the wood grain. The raised seal glowed under the lamp. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt the echo of Mom's voice. "Too crowded this year. Alexandra, you understand." Did I? I opened a drawer, pulled out an old shoebox of letters. Deployment notes from soldiers' families, scribbled thank yous from kids in crayon-faded Polaroids of ceremonies where whole towns turned out. Every scrap of paper screamed the truth: strangers had given me more recognition than my own kin. The bitterness rose sharp as bile. I set the shoebox aside, tapped the folder. Maybe Mason and Delgado were right. Maybe the ceremony needed to be public. But not just anywhere. The lake. The very ground where I'd been sidelined, sent to kitchens and porches, while my siblings basked in applause. The same lake house where family was a password I never seemed to know. If I was going to pin a star, it wouldn't be in the marble halls of D.C. It would be on that grass under that sky with my soldiers and neighbors watching. And maybe, just maybe, my family too. There's a particular kind of quiet on rural highways, the kind where the hum of tires and the slap of bugs on the windshield become their own metronome. Driving back to my hometown after so many years, I noticed the things that hadn't changed: the water tower, with its peeling blue paint, the high school marquee advertising, "Go Cougars," the rusting tractors posed like relics in fallow fields. It had been nearly a decade since I'd turned down this road. And yet, here I was, uniform bag in the backseat, orders in hand, planning to pin a star not in Washington, but on the very soil that had dismissed me. The Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall sat on the edge of town, its flagpole tilted slightly to one side roof, shingles curling like old parchment. The sign out front read, "Bingo Friday, 7th p.m. all welcome." Inside, the air smelled of coffee grounds and mothballs, floor wax, and history. Plaques lined the walls: boys who'd gone off to Vietnam, men who'd served in Korea, a few familiar names from Desert Storm. Colonel Monroe. The post commander, Mr. Jenkins, shuffled toward me. His hands were calloused, his cap too big for his head. "Yes, sir. I heard you wanted to hold a ceremony here. Thought maybe you'd forgotten us." "Never," I said, meaning it. "This is where it started." He squinted. Roof leaks, flagpoles near gone. We do what we can, but... I reached into my folder, slid across a stamped receipt. Paid in full. Roof repairs flag replacement. Jenkins blinked. His lips trembled. You didn't have to. I wanted to. For a moment he couldn't speak. Then he snapped a salute hand, trembling. Welcome home, General. Across town, word spread faster than wildfire. At the diner, Mrs. Jensen, the same neighbor who used to slip cookies into my lunchbox, wiped her hands on her apron. Alex Monroe's coming back to pin on a star. Well, it's about time this town had something to cheer for. At the gas station, old Mr. Callahan nodded sagely. She mowed lawns all summer to pay for those ROTC boots. Knew she'd make something of herself. I didn't come for praise, but hearing their voices filled something hollow in me I hadn't realized was still there. That night my phone buzzed. A text from Dylan. Hey, sis, heard you're planning some kind of event at the VFW, big names in town already talking. Proud of you. Proud. The words stung like lemon in a paper cut. Minutes later, another ping. Carrie this time. Mom says you'll be home for a bit. Let us know if you need anything. We'll see you at the reunion. The audacity made me laugh aloud in my empty farmhouse. Just the very event they'd barred me from. Now suddenly it was a shared occasion. I didn't reply. Not yet. Preparation consumed the week. Delgado wrangled a handful of soldiers to handle logistics. Mason coordinated the guest list, insisting the community deserved a front row seat. Don't downplay this, he said firmly. Your star isn't just for you. It's for every kid in this county who was told they weren't enough. We hung bunting across the VFW porch, replaced the torn flag with a crisp new banner that cracked in the wind. A local brass quartet offered to play. I stopped at the church to speak with Pastor Hale, who'd baptized me as a baby. The fellowship hall smelled of lemon cleaner and casserole. We'd be honored to host a reception, he said warmly. It'll mean the world for folks to celebrate one of their own. One of their own. The words nestled somewhere tender. Driving back to the farmhouse, I passed the lake. The house stood proud on its rise, white paint dulled to gray dockboards sagging with age. My chest tightened. Through the windshield, I saw silhouettes on the porch. Carrie's posture, hands on hips. Dylan's laugh carried across the water. Mom's floral sundress fluttering in the breeze. They were already here, already claiming the space as if nothing had happened. I pulled over, engine idling. For a long moment, I just sat, hands clenched on the steering wheel, listening to the pulse in my ears. Then I drove on. Not tonight. At dawn, I walked the VFW lawn alone. Mist curled off the grass dew, soaking my boots. I pictured rows of folding chairs, soldiers in formation, neighbors, leaning forward, the flag snapping high. This was where the story would shift. Not in their kitchen, not on their terms, but here on mine. That evening, Mason called. Word spreading. Reporters want to come. Keep it small, I said automatically. Alex, he said firmly, don't you dare shrink this. The town needs to see. Your soldiers need to see. Even your family needs to see. I hesitated, then nodded, though he couldn't see it. Fine. Let them see. In the farmhouse kitchen, I set out place cards. Sergeants first, then officers, then finally one labeled simply family. If they came, it wouldn't be at the head table. It wouldn't be by default. It would be as guests. The lake breeze rattled the window as I turned out the lights. They don't know it yet, I whispered to myself, but my star will rise over their lake. The days ticked down like the slow march of a snare drum. Every morning, I woke to the smell of cut grass and lake water, every night to the chirp of crickets through the farmhouse windows. Between those hours, I built a ceremony, brick by brick. The soldiers under Delgado's command arrived in convoys of dusty vans, uniforms, sharp voices, light with excitement. They strung flags across the VFW lawn, hammered tent stakes, and rehearsed until every footfall struck like one. Mason coordinated with the brass quartet, insisting the tempo needed to hit the heart as much as the ear. Chaplain Carter drafted the blessing words that carried not pomp, but weight. I moved among them, quietly, clipboard in hand, adjusting angles, double-checking rosters. It felt less like preparing a celebration and more like planning an operation. And in a way, it was. Because this wasn't just about a star. It was about reclaiming ground. One night long after the soldiers had bunked down, I sat at the farmhouse kitchen table. A single lamp cast circles of light over a neat row of index cards. I'd written names in black ink: Delgado Mason Carter Jenkins, the post commander Mrs. Jensen from the diner. Each card marked for a chair. At the bottom of the stack, I paused over one that read simply, Family. I stared at it for a long time. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds gone cold. Finally, I placed it not at the head table, but along the side near the back. They'd sit among neighbors, not above them. If they came at all. The next morning, the town buzzed with anticipation. Banners hung across Main Street. Congratulations, General Monroe kids, chalked flags onto the sidewalks. An old veteran stopped me outside the grocery store, eyes shining as he pressed my hand. About damn time one of ours got recognized, he said, voice thick. Inside the cart corral, I caught sight of Carrie. She wore her realtor's blazer, despite the heat hair sprayed into perfection. Alex, she called, striding toward me, smile fixed. We were just talking about you at the lake house. Can you believe it? You a general? I braced myself. Carrie. She linked an arm through mine as if we were inseparable. We'll need to coordinate pictures, of course. Mom's already talking about a family portrait after the ceremony. Dylan's bringing his girlfriend, you'll love her. Oh, and the reunion, we should finalize the menu. I stopped in my tracks. The reunion. Her eyes blinked wide with feigned innocence. Of course. You're coming right. A dozen responses caught in my throat. Instead, I gave her a look that could have frozen August heat. I'll see you at the ceremony, I said, flatly pulling away. The hurt flickered in her eyes before she masked it again. Of course. We're so proud. That evening, Delgado found me staring at the lake from the farmhouse porch. You look like you're carrying a heavier ruck than usual, she said. Family's already circling. She nodded. They'll circle harder the closer you get to the finish line. I rubbed at the ache in my chest. What if I can't keep the line between who I am and what they want me to be? Delgado leaned on the porch railing, eyes steady. Then you draw it thicker. You've been trained for this. Boundaries are just perimeters. Her words settled like sandbags, steadying me. The next day, Mason handed me a printed program. Across the top, promotion ceremony, Colonel Alexandra Monroe to Brigadier General. Want to approve the order of events, he asked. I scanned the page, presentation of the colors, invocation, remarks, pinning, benediction, reception. It's good, I said. Mason tapped the bottom line. Reception hosted by community and family. I raised an eyebrow. Community first, he said quietly. Family after, just like you asked. That night, I placed one more chair on the lawn myself. A single seat draped with a folded flag, no name card. It wasn't for family. It was for those who couldn't be there: Martinez, Harper, Lewis. The weight of their absence pressed heavier than any metal. I whispered their names into the dusk. The cicadas answered like a chorus. The morning before the ceremony, a voicemail from Mom buzzed on my phone. Her voice trembled thin as tissue. Alexandra, honey, we heard about the general thing. We'll be there tomorrow. I hope that's all right. I played it twice. The words weren't an invitation. They were an announcement, a claim. I set the phone down, stared at the rows of chairs waiting under the sun. If they come, I whispered, they'll see what honor looks like. The morning of the ceremony broke clear and hot, the kind of Virginia summer day where the sky looks scrubbed clean and the cicadas strike up before noon. I woke early, pulled on my dress blues, and checked every line, every crease. The starched collar scratched my neck, the ribbons weighed heavy across my chest, and still I found myself smoothing invisible wrinkles. In the mirror, a woman stared back, silver streak beginning at the temple, eyes harder than they'd been at 20, but steady. 20 years of service stitched into every line of fabric, every polished button. A knock at the door. Delgado stood there in full uniform cover tucked under her arm. Her eyes shimmered with pride she didn't bother to hide. Ma'am, she said, formation's ready. I nodded, throat tight. The VFW lawn had been transformed. Folding chairs stretched in neat rows, bunting rippled in the breeze, and a brass quartet polished their horns under a shade tent. The smell of fresh-cut grass mingled with barbecue smoke from a neighbor's grill. Children waved tiny flags at the edges. As I stepped into view, the crowd rose. A ripple of applause spread like rain across a roof. Soldiers snapped to attention, boots striking the gravel in unison. Mason's voice carried over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to honor a soldier whose 20 years of service have been marked not by titles, but by deeds. I kept my chin-level eyes fixed on the flag snapping overhead. From the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan, Mason continued, Colonel Alexandra Monroe has led with quiet strength and uncompromising honor. Today, that service is recognized with a star. The brass quartet swelled a slow hymn that lifted goosebumps along my arms. Delgado approached, hands steady but eyes wet. She held the small box as though it were fragile glass. "Ma'am," she whispered, voice shaking, "on behalf of those who followed you, those who never came home, and those who still will thank you." Her fingers pinned the star to my shoulder. Metal-touched fabric weight settled. Applause thundered. Neighbors cheered. Soldiers saluted, hands crisp against brows. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the whole world had pressed pause. I raised my hand, returned the salute, and the sound of boots striking gravel rolled like thunder. And then I saw them. At the back of the crowd, standing on the porch of the VFW as though they owned it, were my family. Carrie in a white sundress, pearls gleaming. Dylan in a sports coat that didn't quite fit. Mom clutching her handbag like a shield. Dad squinting into the sun, jaw tight. They hadn't RSVP'd. They hadn't called to ask. But here they were, smiling wide, waving as though they'd been there all along. Alex's mom called, her voice carrying through the crowd. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." Heads turned, neighbors glanced between us, curiosity sparking. I froze star-heavy on my shoulder, applause still ringing. They pushed forward. Dylan clapped too loud, his voice booming. "Look at you, sis! Always knew you had it in you." Carrie gestured at a photographer. "Make sure you get a shot of us together. Family first." My stomach twisted. The same family who had barred me from reunion tables, left me out of holiday photos, sent me half-hearted packages with my name wrong, now rushing to the spotlight, eager to claim a piece of the shine. I turned deliberately away, shaking the hands of sergeants first. Jenkins, the VFW commander, gripped me tight, whispering, "About time, General." Mrs. Jensen pressed cookies into my palm, tears streaking her cheeks. A Vietnam vet saluted, his hand trembling, and I returned it without hesitation. Only after I had greeted every soldier, every neighbor, did I face the figures lingering at the edge. Carrie reached for me first. "Alex, let's get the family picture before people leave." I cut her off with a glance as sharp as broken glass. "Not yet." Dylan chuckled, trying to smooth it over. "She's just overwhelmed, guys. Big day." Mom's eyes glistened. "Honey, we're just so happy to be here, to celebrate you." Their smiles were wide. Too wide. The kind of smiles that begged the cameras to believe them. The words formed in my throat, clear as if I'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. "The day I became a general," I said evenly, "you brazenly showed up to claim me as family." The crowd hushed. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. Their faces froze, color draining as if someone had turned down the light. Silence hung over the lawn like a low fog. The applause faded. The brass instruments rested in laps. Neighbors shifted in their seats. My words had cut through the celebration sharper than any saber. Carrie blinked, her painted smile faltering. Dylan's hand dropped from my shoulder mid-pat. Mom clutched her handbag tighter, knuckles white. Dad cleared his throat but said nothing. I could have left it at that, a single line delivered like a volley. But 20 years of silence begged to be broken. I motioned toward the VFW hall. "Inside. Now." The soldiers stayed at attention. The crowd murmured, unsure, but I kept my eyes fixed on the four faces that had haunted me longest. Slowly, reluctantly, they followed me through the double doors into the cool, dim hall. The kitchen smelled of coffee grounds and lemon cleaner, the hum of the old fridge underscoring the tension. I closed the door behind us, shutting out the murmurs of neighbors. Alex's mom began, voice too high. I held up a hand. No, you've had 20 years to speak. It's my turn. I laid my palm flat on the counter, the metal of my new star cool against my shoulder. Every year, I got the same call. Too crowded this year, Alexandra. You understand? And I did. I understood perfectly. I understood when you left me peeling potatoes while Dylan was allowed to sit with Dad's business friends. I understood when you left the bleachers empty at my graduation. I understood when my care package in Helmand had my name wrong. Carrie winced. Dylan opened his mouth, but I silenced him with a glare. You told yourselves it was logistics, space, timing, but it wasn't. It was choice. And I wasn't the choice you made. Their faces drained further. Carrie tried, first words tumbling. Alex, we didn't mean it wasn't that we didn't care. We just thought you were so independent, strong. You didn't need us the way you needed each other. My voice sliced through hers. The way you always needed me to be small so you could be big. Her mouth snapped shut. Dylan leaned against the fridge, feigning casual. Come on, sis. Don't make this a thing. We're here now, right? We showed up. I laughed, sharp and humorless. You showed up for the cameras, for the applause, for the moment after 20 years when you could stand in the glow without ever having lit a candle yourself. His smirk faltered. Mom's voice wavered. Sweetheart, you have to know we're proud. Life got complicated. The lake, the grandkids. Dylan's job search. Stop! I held her gaze until she dropped it. You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to stand here and act like 20 years of absence vanish because you showed up once the brass shined bright enough. Dad finally spoke, voice gravelly. Alex, maybe we made mistakes, but we're still your family. I stepped closer, eyes locked on his. Family isn't who claims you at the finish line. It's who walks beside you at mile 1 and mile 20. You weren't there. They were. I gestured toward the lawn outside, where Delgado and Mason and Carter stood among soldiers who had carried me through sandstorms and firefights and endless nights. They are my family. Carrie's eyes glistened. You're not really saying, I'm saying this, you may not claim what you refuse to carry. The words landed heavy and the room went still. For a moment, no one moved. The hum of the fridge filled the void. Then Mom's shoulders sagged, her face pale as porcelain. Carrie bit her lip. Dylan looked at the floor. Even Dad, who rarely yielded ground, lowered his gaze. I took a breath, steadied myself. You can sit in the chairs I set aside. Not at the head. Not in the photos. As guests. Because that's what you chose to be all these years. Their protests died in their throats. We stood in silence, the weight of 2 decades pressing down on all of us. Finally, I turned hand on the door. Outside, the sun was still shining, the flag still snapping in the breeze, the crowd still waiting. I glanced back once. 4 pale faces, shadows of the family I'd once begged to see me. They turned pale, I murmured, when I said, You're welcome to stay today as guests. But you don't get to rewrite my history. And then I opened the door and walked back into the light. Dusk settled slow and golden over the lake. The air was thick with the scent of charcoal and honeysuckle, the flag on the VFW pole lowering with a soft snap in the evening breeze. I stood at the edge of the lawn, dress blues still clinging to me like a second skin star, gleaming faintly in the dying light. Behind me, the reception wound down. Soldiers clinked cups of lemonade. Children darted between folding chairs. Neighbors swapped stories of long-ago summers. My family lingered near the periphery, subdued. Now their earlier bravado melted away. I walked toward the shoreline gravel, crunching under my heels. Mom followed after a pause, her footsteps tentative, like approaching a skittish animal. Alexandra, she said softly. I didn't turn. The lake mirrored streaks of orange and pink. Yes, Mom. Her voice quavered. We should have been better. I should have been better. The words were so simple, so rare, that for a moment I forgot to breathe. She stopped beside me, clutching the strap of her purse like a lifeline. I was afraid you'd get hurt out there, that you'd disappear into that world of uniforms and orders. It was easier to pretend you didn't need us. I finally faced her. Her eyes were watery, lined with guilt. It wasn't easier for me, I said. It was lonely. Her shoulders sagged. I know. We stood in silence, listening to the lap of water against the dock. For the first time, I felt the crack of possibility in the wall between us. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Dad approached next, his boots scuffing the dirt. He stopped a few feet away, hands shoved into his pockets. I let the silences pile up, he admitted. That was my cowardice. I thought not saying anything was safer than saying the wrong thing. Silence, I said evenly, is still a choice. He nodded, eyes lowered. Carrie and Dylan came together side by side, uncharacteristically quiet. Carrie's makeup smudged Dylan's easy smirk, long gone. We were selfish, Carrie said. We leaned on you being strong, so we didn't have to see where we were weak. Dylan rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, we screwed up. Bad. I crossed my arms, let the words hang. Then I spoke. If we're going to talk about tradition, then here are the new terms. They lifted their heads, waiting. First, I said, voice clear over the lapping water, no more excuses about space. Service members and Gold Star families get priority lodging at every reunion. If that means fewer cousins at the lake, so be it. Carrie blinked startled but nodded slowly. Second, there will be a remembrance table at every gathering. Names of those who never came home will be read aloud before any toast or blessing. Mom's hand pressed to her chest. Dad gave a solemn nod. Third, I continued, I'll come when I'm invited, with respect, not obligation. You don't get to treat me like an afterthought anymore. I set my own terms. The four of them stood in silence, the words soaking in. Finally, Carrie spoke. I'll organize the remembrance table, she said, her voice steadier. If you'll help me with the names. Dylan lifted a hand. I'll handle the grill, and the church ramp needs repair. I'll fix that too. Not just for show, for real. Mom's eyes brimmed. Dad nodded once more, slower this time, less out of habit and more like agreement. The church bells rang across the water, 6 slow chimes. The flag on the VFW pole was lowered by Jenkins, his hands reverent as he folded it into neat triangles. Chaplain Carter bowed his head in prayer, words too soft to catch, but weighty enough to feel. I watched my family, still pale, still chastened, but for the first time, I saw the faint outline of change. Not absolution, not repair overnight, but possibility. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill me. Tradition isn't a script we inherit, I said quietly, more to myself than them. It's a table we choose to set. And maybe for the first time, we were building a new one. Sunday morning came with the scent of coffee and cinnamon rolls drifting from the church fellowship hall. The town had gathered for service, the pews creaking with familiar weight hymnals passed down the rows. Afterward, folding tables groaned under platters of deviled eggs, potato salad, and ham slices wrapped in foil. The clatter of serving spoons mixed with laughter, and for once, I didn't feel like an outsider pressed against the glass. Neighbors lined up to shake my hand, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet nods. A Vietnam vet clasped my shoulder. We waited a long time for one of ours to wear that star, he said, voice thick. You carry it for all of us. I returned his salute, not crisp, not formal, just real. Across the room, my family lingered near the punch bowl, tentative, quieter than I'd ever seen them. They didn't push forward, didn't demand the spotlight. They simply stood waiting. For the first time, I let them wait. That evening, back at the farmhouse, the porch creaked beneath the weight of 3 familiar figures, Mason Delgado and Chaplain Carter. We sat in mismatched chairs, fireflies blinking in the darkening fields. Mason raised a glass of sweet tea. To the newest general in the U.S. Army, and to the woman who taught us that boundaries are just another kind of perimeter. Delgado grinned. Ma'am, you're still stuck with us, you know. We don't go away just because you've got a star now. Wouldn't have it any other way, I said, meaning it. The air smelled of cut hay and wood smoke from a distant farm. The weight in my chest felt lighter than it had in years. Inside, my phone buzzed. New orders. Assignment overseas. I stared at the screen, the words crisp, bureaucratic, life-altering, General Monroe Command Pacific Theater. The world was calling louder than ever. I set the phone down, let the moment breathe. Later that night, I wrote a note to Mom. Not long, not emotional. Just a list of names for the remembrance table starting with Martinez Harper Lewis. Soldiers who deserved to be remembered more than I ever needed to be forgiven. I didn't know if she'd follow through, but at least the choice was no longer mine to beg for it was theirs to carry. The next weekend, the town hosted one more gathering at the VFW. Families crowded the hall. Children darted underfoot. Laughter rang against the wood-paneled walls. My family sat at one of the long tables. Not at the head, not in control, just present. When the group photo was called, I didn't stand at the edge this time. I didn't step aside to make room. I stood where I wanted in the center, not to be the focus, but to be counted. Present. Later, I walked out onto the porch alone. The lake glittered under the moon cicadas, thrumming like an old hymn. My star caught the light, but it no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a compass pointing forward. I thought of the scared 12-year-old girl pressed against the screen door, listening to laughter drift from the deck she wasn't welcome on. She was gone now. In her place stood a general, a woman who had learned that being excluded didn't make her less. It made her more because she had built a life on her own terms. Behind me, I heard the shuffle of footsteps, my mother's voice tentative. Alexandra, are you all right? I turned, studied her face. The lines were deeper now, eyes softer. I'm fine, Mom, I said. And for the first time, it was true. The next morning, I zipped my uniform bag, hoisted it over my shoulder, and stepped outside into the dawn. The car waited to take me to the airport. Orders were orders. My family stood in the driveway, not blocking the path, not demanding a word. Just there, watching. Safe travels, Dad said gruffly. Send pictures, Carrie added quietly. Dylan shoved his hands in his pockets. See you when you're back, sis. I nodded, adjusting the weight on my shoulder. We'll see. The road stretched ahead, shimmering in the morning light. As the car pulled away, I looked back one last time. The beach house, the lake, the town all shrinking into the distance. For the first time, I didn't feel chained to them. I felt free. I whispered to myself. After 20 years, I was never waiting for them to claim me. I learned to claim myself and to set the terms. And that was enough. To everyone listening, maybe you've been excluded, overlooked, told you weren't enough. Maybe your family or friends or a whole community wrote you out of their story. Remember this. Your worth isn't determined by who shows up at your table. It's defined by the life you build, the boundaries you set, and the courage to stand in your own light. If this story touched, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Reflect on your own strength. And if you'd like more stories like this, subscribe and stay with us. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming someone they can never ignore again.